Hello and welcome. My name is Meepolis, they, she, he, and this is Literally Graphic. And today we are doing a video I haven't done in a while, but there was a hole in my schedule and this seemed fun. Obviously, I'll be including both audiobooks and graphic novels, so this is one of my few medium crossing videos. I read a lot of books that I really liked this past year, making this a bit difficult to put together. I also deliberately did not rate more books this year than ever before. Starting off with the lowest of the low, the award probably has to go to Why the Last Man by Brian K. Vaughan and Pia Guerra. As more of you might know now than before the TV show arrived and was cancelled, this is a series about the last, quote, man on Earth and his monkey. Needless to say, the ideas about gender in this book are pretty reductive and unscientific, and the ultimate reasoning behind this mass death event proves to be very silly. I was a completely different person when I DNF'd it maybe a decade ago, and I should have left it at that. But so many people have liked the series that one does get to doubting themselves. It's been nice that at least since the TV show was cancelled that I've seen some more people pointing out the giant holes and how much hate and ignorance was woven throughout this silly series. Next up was a tough runner-up, and that was Woman Who Rides Like a Man by Tamora Pierce. I reread this entire series this past year, and overall it was an interesting look back at a series that obviously spoke to my genderqueer heart as a child. But this book was so Orientalist and white feminist. I believe the author has also acknowledged this, but yeah, definitely a very low point. I feel like we could pitch this book out of the Alana Quartet and no one would really care. Pick number 3 has to be the French graphic novel Audubon, On the Wings of the World by Fabien Gorliou and Jeremy Royer. Another 1-star review. I suspected it would not be a new favorite before I even picked it up, but the more I read the book and dove into research about Audubon, the more ridiculous the whole thing became. While in some ways the creators were more than happy to show Audubon to be an asshole and claimed to not be glossing over his racism, the story they included about the man interacting with a black family in a swamp is frankly ridiculous and should not be taken at face value. And, among other things I detail further in my review, they combined many indigenous people that Audubon interacted with into one ageless and tribeless, stoic Native American man who only exists in the story to serve Audubon hand and foot. Unsurprisingly, colonizer science and so-called discovery goes unquestioned, etc., etc., etc. This is one of those reviews that I did relatively a lot of other reading to try and give a more fulsome perspective, so I learned a lot, but it only made this particular angle on Audubon's life seem particularly lacking. Pick number 4 actually surprised me a little bit because it feels like I finished the series more than a year ago, but apparently I finished Tokyo Tarareba Girls in March of 2021. While it's certainly not my favorite series from Akiko Higashimura, the whole thing doesn't necessarily belong here near the top of my list of least favorite books of the year. Spoiler alert! Mostly, it's just the end, when we find out the romantic interest is so broody because he married his childhood doctor when she was at death's door because she dreamed of being a bride. It just sort of sprang out of nowhere and I was completely unprepared. I felt very relieved subsequently to finish my reread of Higashimura's other series, Princess Jellyfish, and have it still largely hold up. I was concerned that perhaps I had missed something when I read it initially back in the day. To conclude, this review of the worst of what I read this year, I actually reviewed Invisible Differences by Julie Dashes and Mademoiselle Caroline earlier this month, which also makes it my most recent disappointing read. We edged slightly higher to a 2 out of 5-star rating with an overview of what life is like for a French woman who doesn't realize she is on the autism spectrum. A bit hard to read emotionally because of how much pain she is being put through by autistics. I ultimately lowered my rating mostly because of the praise of Hans Asperger and ABA that remained in the outro of this book, translated in 2021. Very easily removed. Flipping things around and starting at number 5 of my top 5 reads this year, I read so many good books that I really enjoyed and learned a lot from, so it was very difficult to narrow it down. But because I need to start somewhere, in no particular order, but all 5 out of 5 stars, here we go. First off, early in the year I picked up Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet A. Washington. A very difficult read. It took something I sort of knew some stuff about and really expanded my knowledge and appreciation for the kind of harm that Western medicine has done to the Black people in so-called America. Obviously, living through multiple health crises that are going on right now in both of my countries, this increased knowledge has helped me think in more nuanced ways about different aspects of public health. It also increased the level of implicit violence that I assume the state is engaged in at any given moment against marginalized people, particularly Black people. With all the discussion around healthcare going on right now, I would highly recommend this book. Next up, we have Aya, Love in Yop City by Marguerite Abut and Clement Aubrey. This volume is actually a bind-up of the final 3 volumes in this French series and really sent me off on a high note. We have been following a young woman named Aya growing up in the 70s Ivory Coast. As the series progressed, the focus expanded to include a number of side characters, giving us a really diverse look at what it was like to be a Black person in this French colony at this time. About says she deliberately chose to set it during a time of prosperity in her home country, which provided a nice contrast to much of my other readings from the continent. I also like how gender and sexuality were handled here at the end of the series. Under the Udala Tree by Chinelo Okaparante is another example of a very interesting and unique perspective on Nigeria. Described as queer historical literary fiction, quote, Ijoma comes of age as her nation does. Born before independence, she is 11 when civil war breaks out in the young Republic of Nigeria. Sent away to safety, she meets another displaced child, and they, star-crossed, fall in love. They are from different ethnic communities. They are also both girls. End quote. My 4th pick was another recent read, namely Footnotes in Gaza by Joe Sacco. Another one of those longer books that I've been meaning to get to for forever. I finally picked up Footnotes in Gaza at the end of November, and it was an incredible crash course in both comics journalism as a whole, and also, obviously, on Gaza. Watching past Sacco, observing and experiencing Gaza in the early 2000s, research and interview about a historical atrocity in Gaza almost 100 years ago, it puts a lot of things into perspective, to say the least. Similar to Medical Apartheid, it reminded me of more hidden violence. Footnotes in Gaza also reminded me of all the local and international military conflicts that both my countries are involved in, and how many deaths my tax dollars have probably paid for. I did want to end on a bit of a more optimistic point, though. So out of all the 5-star reads I read this year, I decided to finish this list with Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. A young adult urban fantasy, queer with a touch of romance. All of BookTube has surely heard of Cemetery Boys. I felt late to the party, but it's not too late for you to also read this book if you haven't already. Quote, when his traditional Latinx family has problems accepting his gender, Yadriel becomes determined to prove himself a real brujo. With the help of his cousin and best friend Maritza, he performs the ritual himself and then sets out to find the ghost of his murdered cousin and set it free. End quote. And there we are, 5 of the worst books I read this year and 5 new favorites that I'll be thinking about far into the future. What were some of the best and worst books you read this year? You're more than welcome to friend me over on Goodreads so we can keep up to date on each other's 1-star and 5-star reads and everything in between. Bye, y'all. Keep reading and organize to end capitalist oppression. And as always, Literally Graphic is created on land that should be given back to the traditional landholders, which in this case is, to my knowledge, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Anishinaabe people, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation.